Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Clark Freilich,
And I'm Clyde Gaw.
and this is the Blocks, Paper, Scissors podcast. In today's podcast, Clyde and I will be discussing 10 things that all TAB teachers should abandon. Clyde, how you been?
Clark, let's see. Not too bad. Survived the first 3 months of the winter. We're enjoying a little bit of spring break. It's been very, very, I want to say busy inside the New Palestine High School art room, in room 1214, and next door in Miss Gardner's room. Very busy. Kids doing all kind of things. But we're getting ready for our spring art show and then the county art show, so we've got a lot of art projects going on.
That's right, the spring art show. I just had mine, and it was a pretty good success.
I saw the works on the wall, and they're spectacular. I love the artist statements that the children write to accompany their work. And Clark, your shows are always spectacular.
Well, artist statements are always one of those things, especially with elementary kids, because it's kind of hard to get them to want to write. But I've been experimenting with a couple things, more specifically Flipgrid, on getting kids to write about and talk about their artwork. And it seems that, and you probably already know this, that kids tend to be more open when they record themselves speaking or creating a video.
I've seen how you get your kids to work in with Flipgrid, and it's really hilarious to see them speak their minds and talk about their art ideas. I'm just thinking about all the wonderful intellectual benefits that gives them to use technology, to put words into motion, to speak the words, to compose sentences relating to reflective experience about their art.
It really it puts the icing on the cake, so to speak. So,
no question. One of the important things about authentic works of art is that kids are not just parroting back learning objectives that the teacher has prescribed during an activity, but these are children's, real voice, real words. They're real stories about their art, and so what I always noticed reading artist statements in your art exhibits or in other choice-based art teachers or TAB teachers is the fascinating stories that the kids write about their art.
And that's what art is. It's storytelling in a visual sense.
Absolutely.
So our topic that I wanted to discuss today is the things that, as we read blog posts and things for new TAB teachers, there's always a few things that always pop up, and it specifically has to do with new teachers to teaching for artistic behavior. And it really has to do with a switch.
Uh-huh.
A switch of how people and teachers are learning how to do TAB. And sometimes it's frustrating because, having been through it and gone through it, I'm familiar with those feelings, and yet it was easy for me, I suppose, to do it, but I still find myself slipping back in a couple of those things. but at least I can recognize it when those things happen. So one of the first thing I want to talk about is this idea of a quiet classroom. Before I was teaching TAB or in general education circles, people, they think that a quiet classroom is an engaged classroom.
Uh-huh.
And in some sense it is.
Uh-huh.
But it's not absolute quiet. You know, when you're dealing with 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds, sitting in a classroom for 5 hours a day, absolute quiet is, I don't think it's developmentally good for them to do.
No.
So when they come into the art room, they're naturally excited to be working with materials and paints, and they really want to get these things out. And to have them, again, continue to be quiet, it doesn't work. It works against the idea of being creative. One of the things I always want to tell new teachers who are asking, how do you keep your classroom quiet?
Yeah.
I'm like, you know what? It's a battle I don't want to get into. There are times when I want kids, when they're yelling and screaming, it's a time for them to, I need to talk to them and to teach them how to self-monitor.
Uh-huh.
I'm allowing you to talk. You're free to talk. But this isn't, we are still indoors, and you don't need to be yelling and screaming at the top of your lungs just because you think it's funny.
I think there's, the problem of the quiet classroom, or I should say, it's from my perspective at this point in my experience as a teacher, as a teacher who's been teaching in K-12 ed for going into my 4th decade, thinking about the way schools are run, the expectations are unrealistic, I think, for to expect children who are in their formative stages of intellectual development, to act like adults in a monastery. That's unrealistic. I know schools are designed for distinct roles, fragmentation of subject matter into the minds of children. But what our research has revealed to us, our observations of children learning, is education is a very human endeavor.
Well, I'm curious where the idea of this perfect classroom came from. If it was from media, if it was something that was brought up through television, through the Andy Griffith Show, or anyone and everyone I've ever talked to said that it's never really been a case where the classroom's always been quiet.
I think part of the problem also is the way schools are structured, and there is pushback, I think, now and realization that the school design, environmental design, is not conducive to intellectual development in young children. So, it used to be this idea of the open classroom used to be ridiculed, but I think school architects, school designers are taking a second look at the way schools are designed, and there is a lot of implementation now of
collaborative spaces.
Yes, exactly. Collaborative spaces, open spaces, spaces for creativity, spaces for unique learning events. The old notion of didactic learning, where children are they are in the receiving end of knowledge, and the authority figure, the teacher, is on the delivery end. That's a notion that I think is old-fashioned.
But it took, 40 years to figure that out?
For policymakers who are in, making policy decisions at the state houses of legislature, they still haven't figured it out yet. But construction of knowledge is an active process, and speaking and communicating verbally is an important part of that process. So how are you going to develop knowledge? How are you going to develop communication skills if you can't talk?
Right. So the quiet classroom is it's almost an ideal that is not necessarily an attainable expectation. I mean, you can have it, but is it really the best thing? So the things that I use to get my kids to get busy, because when hands are busy, minds are busy, and if the minds are busy, then the mouths are not as busy because they're too busy trying to focus on what they're doing and getting into a state of flow. So, when my kids come into my classroom, now they're coming in from a hallway where the expectation is that they're quiet. I allow them to talk with, not out loud, use whisper voices because we do want to be respectful of other classrooms.
Right.
And when they remodeled our school, they didn't take into account how loud kids are. So everything it's a hard, clean surface.
Yeah.
They put in vinyl tiling in the hallways with hard walls, and it's easy to clean.
Yeah.
And it's easy to take care of.
Yeah.
But it's also loud. It's a very bright school, not in a light sense, but in an aural sense. So when kids come into my classroom, they're quiet, but as soon as they hit my classroom, they change because they know they're allowed to talk.
Right.
So, and then I go right into my 5-minute lesson. And I do have an expectation that they are at least paying attention. If they're whispering, if they want to comment to their friends, that's fine. But there are times when kids are messing around and, it's not a perfect situation. But for the most part, kids know because they want to get started that first 5 minutes of class is when they get their instruction.
You're the program director and the studio manager. You have some important things to say to them to start class out.
And even if it's just, okay, you may start, then that's it. Once they get busy doing that, then there's always, I call it it's about 5 minutes of chaos when everyone's running around, setting up their workspace, getting their materials, talking to people, trying to figure out what they're going to do. But then after that, 10 minutes into class, there's that hum.
Yes. Kathy Douglas, she called that the hum. And that's the hum right after the transition between the 5-minute lesson and then, there's that bit, there's the transitional period is there's some uncertainty about who's going to be doing what. But then, magically, people settle in, the process of emergence takes over again. And the things begin, children's ideas, they begin to solidify, and their activities that they've designed for themselves take shape.
Exactly. So then they're working and they're getting settled in, but then there's always a few kids who take a little bit longer getting settled in and trying to figure out what to do, but still going to be noise. You got your block builders who are typically the loudest group.
Yeah.
If you don't like the sound of blocks, then maybe find a mat or something to put on the floor.
Yeah.
So when those blocks fall down, they're not as loud.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of teachers don't like the loud, sharp noises that are louder than others. And I think it does cause a lot of stress to some people. That's a teacher issue.
Yeah.
And I've used meditation. If there's something that happens, I'm always take 3 deep breaths and, just to get over that initial thing so I can think. So I'm not overreacting when something happens. Kid drops a whole bottle of glaze or paint or things like that. Most teachers' first reaction is to yell at the kids.
Yeah.
And you don't want that. We're here to build relationships with kids. We're not here to punish them for making a mistake.
It's taken me a while, to remember that accidents happen, and there are some things that you cannot control, and you after a while you realize that messes will occur, and it's counterproductive to be to react in a negative way.
That kind of brings me to another issue that new teachers to TAB, are always stressing about, and that's huge messes. The whole controlling of materials,
Yeah.
they kind of go hand in hand.
We've seen a lot of questions and statements of concern about new teachers on the TAB Educators page about letting go and about that issue, and so that's one of the reasons we'd like to address those questions.
In a TAB classroom, as students are learning to not only express, one of the big things that we're teaching is how to use materials. And as Kathy Douglas famously says, you give the kids the least amount of information to get them started, and
Yes.
then let them go, dependent upon different materials.
Uh-huh.
Because some materials are more expensive than others, and I think teachers naturally want to make sure that those materials aren't wasted
Right.
in the process. I've always caught myself when things happen, when kids do some stuff that you don't even preconceive
Uh-huh.
where the ideas come from. But are we here to promote ideation and coming up with ideas and experimenting, or do we want to limit their ability to try new things?
Right. Because the focus is on the child's creative process. They're
Right.
allowing them, the final outcome that we're seeking is children's creative capacity, expanding it, and that's done through executive functioning. So the importance of the materials are a conduit through to which TAB teachers refine children's thinking process and help them expand their creative capacity. I used to be a materials hoarder and put a great deal of importance on materials. Now, not so much. I hate to see when a child will take a piece of canvas and acrylic paints, and at the end of the class period, they throw it away. If I find one in the trash, I say, we can re-gesso this and reuse it. We don't have to throw it away.
Right.
So also using that as a teaching moment for repurposing
Right. Because
materials is
artists, they like to use a lot of materials that they find, or they reuse materials that they have. So regessoing a canvas it's just another lesson. I know a lot of elementary teachers who worry about paper and wasting paper. Papers, it's not a material that costs too much money. It depends on how much paper you have.
Yeah.
It's some people, they use less expensive paper for regular everyday things. Some people use sketchbooks. Some people use goose paper, which is good on one side paper. But trying to teach kids be a little more mindful of how they use the materials is another part of what we teach.
Right.
And having them, work with their mistakes, which is a big thing. A lot of kids, they make a mistake, their inclination is to just wad it up and start all over again. Yeah. And we have control of that, but it's not something to get totally stressed over.
Yeah.
Because a lot of teachers are, they just go through so much paper, and you can plan for that at the beginning of the year by ordering either more paper or having some less expensive paper.
Yeah.
So I've kicked around some ideas, and I've tried a lot of things, and trying to make it work for me. Giving kids free access to paper is not necessarily the best thing, because,
That's what I do.
well, you're high school.
I purchase a lot of 50 weight paper, and I find that you can draw on it very well and paint on it just as well. Sometimes it gets a little wrinkly. I'll also have a supply of 60 weight and 80 weight in different sizes, 9 by 12, 12 by 18. But the favorite material to draw and paint on?
Cardboard.
Cardboard. Because who cares?
Right.
And they get down on that.
There's a freedom there that, when the teacher is like, this material is freely available everywhere.
Uh-huh.
And using that and showing kids how to use something that's, not everyone has paper, but they can find a box.
Right.
And they can cut it up or tear it up or just paint it as is. Because that's what a lot of kids like to do, is just paint the box.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
box.
a starting place.
Or build the box.
That's, going back to Nan Hathaway's idea for scribble stage.
Right.
That's a scribble stage in creativity development, paint the box. But, if cardboard's good enough for Picasso, it's good enough for us. And in fact, I'm doing some really fun things myself on cardboard, so.
Yeah. Well, that's why they call you Captain Cardboard.
It's also because I don't have much of a personal art fund, so I do a lot of dumpster diving. But I saw you had some really good cardboard out in your dumpster out here. I was half tempted to make a detour before I came into the studio today.
That dumpster's always full. And and I go through it, and I pull, it's like, save me some cardboard. Schools are an endless supply of cardboard.
They are. The best cardboard is when your maintenance department is installing whiteboards or big, any big equipment.
That's right.
It comes in shipped in cardboard boxes, delivered to the school, and just tell the maintenance folks or custodians, hey, save me some nice big chunks of cardboard.
It's on my teacher donation list. Is any cardboard from Amazon's good. I like their cardboard.
Yeah, that's
it's
good
easy
stuff.
to cut. It's not too thick.
So we were talking about a noisy classroom, right? But now we're on to,
stress over mess.
Stress over mess and stress over materials.
Right. But
over time, you develop an awareness of what your kids like.
They really enjoy painting, and they really enjoy cardboard, especially, and clay. But back to having control over the materials, and giving up that stress as a teacher to do some introspection and looking at how you feel in noticing and recognizing when you are getting stressed and pinpointing those things. If it's noise, if you don't like it, then that's something that you need to work on. Either find a way to alleviate that stress. Because if you're stressed, the kids are going to feel that stress, and you really don't need to transfer that stress to kids, because if you're stressed, your tolerance level is going to drop, and you'll be yelling at kids, and it's not a good thing.
You don't feel good at the end of the day.
No, you don't feel good. So what if a kid uses 10,000 craft sticks?
I buy my craft sticks in bulk, and I tell them they're not building elements but adhesive elements. But you're right, they stressing about how kids would use the materials in ways that we don't ordinarily think are proper. I have at times told kids, that material's best used for this purpose. For example, the craft stick, and even though I've got, it costs $100 to buy a 50-pound box of craft sticks, the small low temp 6-inch length.
Oh, you're talking about the glue sticks?
Yeah, the glue sticks.
Yeah.
And so I've seen them take those and build with them, and I'm like, that's fascinating work, but you're better off if you use strips of, little pieces of cardboard instead. And
But then it's a learning process.
Yes.
And when you're dealing with, like most of us, 500 or more kids, you have to take into account that there is going to be some level of waste,
Yes.
and you have to take into account and just make sure that the kids know that if you are going to not use the materials appropriately, you're going to run out of materials.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like beating a dead horse. You just make adjustments for the next year. Like this year, I bought 4 boxes of Crayola crayons, not crayons, markers, the class packs, which is about 800 markers. And I'm out. I still have 9 weeks left. They go through them. And a lot of them either because they didn't put lids on them or whatever reason. So next year I'm going to have to order 5. I'm just going to have to, until it comes to a point where I think they understand it. I just, instead of getting something else, I'll just buy those markers.
They're hard on markers because they find out that not only can you draw really cool, colorful lines with them, but you can also make dots with them. You can, and then of course there's our curiosity is to see what's inside the marker, and we'll pull them apart. See, you can see the ink container inside, and see what makes this marker tick. So.
And I also do watercolor with them.
Yes,
so.
dip them in a little cup of water and watch the ink explode into the water, or to pull them out and draw on paper.
So just being mindful of those type of those materials that you notice kids using a lot of is another way to kind of keep track on that. Now you were talking about when you buy something like craft sticks or glue gun or glue sticks or things like that, it kind of triggered something in my head that as an art teacher, we have preconceived ideas of what they could be building with them.
Yeah.
That's just natural as an artist. When we see materials, we think, oh, I could do this, or I could do this, or I could do this. That doesn't necessarily mean that's what the kids are going to build.
Yeah.
As an elementary teacher, I think of a lot of different ways that I can do craft sticks, but a lot of kids, they're starting from scratch, and so they're stacking them or making a square and just building a 3-foot tall cube.
Very simple structures.
Right. That is a learning process. And when you see that happening as an art teacher, you need to step in, and this is a time to kind of probe and see what they're thinking and maybe intercede and say, hey, why don't you try this, or what's another way that you could do this?
That's when a tab teacher would do, like you say, an intervention and make suggestions and do a quick solo demo or small group demo there. You step in and say, here's another idea you can use. And so we're already, the tab teacher is already at an advanced level, and we already have preconceived notions about what can be used with the material. And the children are starting from a foundational level that's very basic and primary. And they're
like with my older kids, I would give them challenges. You have your cardboard or your art trap with your challenges. Challenges are always good because it's something that not every kid's going to want to do.
Yeah.
But if they see a challenge, I gave my kids a 100-stick challenge. And I thought, well, I'll just count out 100 sticks and have 100 sticks there. But instead of doing that, I just left the sticks out there, and the kids took it upon themselves to count out 100 sticks so that they didn't go over the 100-stick challenge. And I just said, use 100 sticks to build whatever. I had kids who built bridges, and other kids see kids building bridges, so they're building bridges.
That's interesting. You put a constraint on them with the limitation of 100.
Right. And that could be 50, but still, it's one way of controlling your materials, but not limiting them creatively. Say, it's kind of hacking the creative process, so to speak, because given the limitation, it makes them think they have to think more creatively in solving those problems.
Thinking about how we're just talking about different activities here. Also understanding that our rooms are set up to do simultaneous activities all in at the same time. How many centers would you estimate you have open currently in your room?
On any given day, I have the basics. I have drawing, collage, painting, construction, or architecture, sculpture.
Uh-huh.
Printmaking's open, but not a lot of kids use it right now for some reason. I have origami,
Uh-huh.
which comes and goes.
Uh-huh. Depending on the child.
Depending on the child, yeah. Weaving's always open.
Uh-huh.
So that's 5 or 6 right there.
So simultaneously, you got really over six learning centers open, plus special projects. You have special projects that a child might conference with you ahead of time or during class time, saying, Mr. Freilich, I'd really like to bring these materials in from home and work on them during art class. And have you ever had any experiences like that?
I do get kids who do that. And I encourage kids to do that. I said, if you're doing something at home, bring it in.
Uh-huh. I do that all the time.
I don't think that's encouraged enough in classrooms.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's something that to make that class or school home connection stronger. I want kids to be able to, this kind of goes back to how this whole tab thing started with you and I back in 1999 when we were teaching Visions Art and kids were bringing stuff in that we were just blown away by.
Yeah.
And weren't seeing that in our classroom.
That's when you and I saw that the child's identified more strongly with their home creative activities than they were identifying with what we were providing them with a teacher-directed lesson. As you recall, during our first podcast, we had mentioned that, we had a child, you had their work digitized from their home, and we put the work side by side up on the computer, and they were writing artist statement about the in-class work and the home work, the home art activity they were doing. They were drawing primarily, and they wrote copiously about their home drawings, their home art, and that's when you and I had that aha moment. We said, there's the social emotional connection,
right?
The emotional connection is, that's the glue to that drives motivation is emotional connection, right. And we knew that
it's the key that starts the engine. It's very important that the kids have that, and that's why art class is such an integral part of any school. To some kids, we are the reason they come to school.
Right. Claire Bell Baker, the eminent American educator from the 19th century, she said, once you unleash a child's emotional drive, there's no stopping them. Once a school can marshal the school's resources, a caring teacher, knowledgeable teacher, can help the child unleash their emotional drive in their learning activities. That is the pathway where you want to have their energies focused.
I don't know about you, but thinking about my elementary, Edgewood Elementary, the only things that I remember are those things that were emotional, and those creative endeavors that I did in art class or a school play, or those things that resonated with me. Now, I didn't have Sister Mary Euphemia, but
well, Sister Mary Euphemia, bless her heart, she was not an emergent curriculum practitioner. That was Miss McDonald. from my third grade teacher.
Well, I don't remember
Sister
anybody
Mary,
who did emergent thinking like we do
no,
in elementary,
no,
because
that was back in the.
back in the 60s and early 70s,
There was a lot of it going around because you had reintroduction
Right.
of constructivist classrooms and new ideas were going into education in the 60s in the United States.
but not in my classroom.
mine neither. That was pretty much authoritarianism, and it was externally authorized. There was just a narrow set of knowledge that we could work with, and that we were expected to understand. This illicit knowledge, explicit knowledge,
Right.
was there was no, you couldn't deviate from it. Which is completely opposite from what you and I provide, which is an abundance of learning opportunities and an abundance of knowledge.
A universe of knowledge.
A universe of knowledge. If we could quote one of our favorite art teachers, Diane Jakewith, art is a very big subject.
Well, Clyde, we've hit a few things about these things, but there are a few more that I think we should continue to talk about in our next podcast. Things like stressing over switching centers or changing materials in class. I know a lot of teachers are concerned about that. Assigned seats,
I don't use them.
I don't use them either, but again, another thing we can talk about. I'll take that back. I do use them for my younger kids. For some reason, they want assigned seats, but I only use them when they come in because it takes time I'll talk about that next time.
Yeah, that's a fun topic. We can talk about that. It goes to the dynamics of what's going on inside the TAB classroom.
Grading and rubrics, which I know we can spend a lot of time talking about.
We should maybe get some outside conversationalists to talk about grading and rubrics. I know there's that's a very important topic because the TAB teacher's affected by what the school's policies are and their own grading structure, and how does a TAB teacher deal with those limitations or those constraints.
How do we fit our square peg in the round hole, etc.? We can.
Yeah.
And we do have strategies to help with that.
TAB teachers are crafty.
And creative. We can play the game just like anybody else. We're going to talk about stressing over kids who appear to do nothing.
That's a good topic.
Yeah. And
I've been writing about that topic.
Incubation.
Yes, incubation.
And boredom.
Yep.
Stressing over art gangs.
I know. Clark, we forgot to mention during this podcast, we had told our listeners earlier that we were going to have a very special guest on our
That's right,
our
last
show.
one.
And we came to find out that our special guest she's been recovering from a bad bout of the flu bug.
Yeah.
And so she's been unavailable.
Recuperating.
And we hope that she's doing well.
Right.
We will have a wonderful conversation with Kathy when she comes on. We should get Diane back on the show and get Ian Sands and all of our other favorite TAB teachers.
Melissa Purdy.
Yeah, we should.
Oh, we should talk about TAB stock coming up.
Yeah, TAB stock's coming up. We don't know Lisa Van Plusid and Candy Paul Price, who are going to be facilitating TAB stock this summer. I don't know how. I mean, it's open to 40 folks. There's 40 slots available.
Right. I think there's 25. At least the last time I checked, there was 25 or more that said they were going. and it's a great professional development, especially if you're interested in tab or doing tab. To sit down around the fire and just talk.
Yeah, it's a experience that's rejuvenating and very, very inspirational.
Right. At least everyone I've talked to said that it's the best professional development they've been to. It's not overly scheduled. We're very flexible in what we do because we'd rather, it's meaning over anything else. We want people to get the best, what they need out of it.
Right. What they can get out of it. And,
right.
And everybody's has different needs.
Yeah. I think our friend, Mr. Nunn.
Is Christopher going to show up, do you think?
He said he was going, so that would be awesome.
That'd be a coup.
Yeah, it would be. We should get him on this. He
Yeah.
could talk about his workshop.
Christopher's he's got a heck of a setup.
He does. It's an amazing setup. I wanted to get out there this week to see. I want to learn how to do some laser cutting.
He had his kids building a 8-foot tall marble run.
I saw that.
It was really wild.
Yeah.
Using gum tape and cardboard tubes.
One of the smartest people I know. I mean, how many degrees does he have?
Christopher is a jewel for Central Indiana.
Oh, yeah.
And the work he does is so vital and important.
So we're going to wrap up this episode of Blocks, Paper, Scissors. Just a reminder to our listeners, if you have a question or topic, send Clyde an email or send us a direct message on
Facebook.
This podcast is now available on Podbean and iTunes. So if you like what you hear, please subscribe and give us a review. Only 5-star reviews are accepted. Thank you all for listening to the Blocks, Paper, Scissors podcast. We'll see you next time.
Goodbye.
Adios.
You have to let it all go, Neil. Fear, doubt, and disbelief. Free your mind.